which I prepared to summarize.
I will share the slides as you just start. So I just need to share my screen here. Okay. And please just let me know when you can see it.
Okay, something is forming. Okay, terrific. So I tried to summarize the key points from last week in this slide. As we can see, Rav Dov showed us that when we study Torah, we look at it from many different aspects. For example, the opening verse, Bereshit, in the beginning, which we see on the left side with the red letter Bet, which is the second letter of the alphabet, of the Hebrew alphabet. And we paid attention to the order of the words. We paid attention to the order of the letters. And we found various significance in it. For example, we asked the question, why does God, who of course, he is the key player in this creation, why does he appear only on the third word? And that is something that we can contemplate on. One of the things that Rav Dov mentioned is that we don't try to answer every question right away. Sometimes it's very important that we sit with a question. It's interesting that in the Shema, it actually says that you should put God's words on your heart. And one of the explanations given for that is that we should put it on the heart so that when the right time comes, it drops into the heart. So sometimes we have to ask the questions way before we actually get the answers. And I think one of the greatest things that we saw last week was this outline of the structure, the literary structure of this first chapter, where we can see the first day, the second day, the third day on the top lines, and then we have the fourth, fifth, and sixth day, and of course the Sabbath following. And what Rav Dov shared with us came from Nechama Leibovich, who actually sees these two parallel stages in creation. We see on the first day, on the fourth day, that we deal with light, Ol. We see that in the second day, we deal with heavens and the waters. And then on the fifth day, birds and fish. We see that on the third and the sixth day, we deal with land and with land creatures. And this brought up the suggestion that God starts creation by creating a home. And he creates a home for all of us. And then he populates the home in these stages that we see before us. And perhaps that leads to the Shabbat, where we can not just be together in the home, but we can actually be blessed together with the Shabbat. To me, one of the most interesting aspects of this structure is that there's good in every day, but for some reason on the second day, we don't see God saying, and he saw that it is good. One of the possible reasons for that, and I'm just sharing a thought, is that when God separates, when he separates the waters, the ones in the heavens and the ones below, then separation is something that is not necessarily good. It can actually end up in something that can be quite bad. It's interesting that on the third day, when God brings all of these waters to one place so that land can surface, can appear, then we see that he says that he sees good because we see things coming together. Echad, we see things becoming one place. And maybe what makes me so excited about these sessions is that we see how the waters that God has perhaps spawned in the Tower of Babel with all of the different nations with their own spirit that developed independently are now here in these sessions coming together, which we know is good in the eyes of God. And may this indeed bring us all together in the manner that God wants. And with that, I hand off to Rav Dov, I hope this was a good enough summary of last week. Rav Dov?
There we go. Looks like his video is temporarily frozen there.
Yes, we have some technical challenges to overcome.
Well, maybe while we're getting that reconnected, does the screen look all right? I stopped sharing the screen, so I mean, can you see me again?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. Maybe I'll just share, yes, that, part of what we're doing here today is a bringing together of Christians and Jews. We're kind of spread geographically between Canada, Uganda, and Israel, and kind of roughly in thirds today. Oh, Kim Johnson, see you. Hi, welcome to the call. Glad to have you. I hope there are verb tables on your window back there. And you were glad to share our love of the Bible together, our love of, believing that God gave us such a wonderful gift. And we're just glad to be able to share this time with our Israeli Jewish brothers who have a little bit of a linguistic leg up on us, but we won't let that get the best of us as we share together. So let's see. Rav Dov, are you back with us?
I'm back. Yes, I'm back.
Wonderful.
I want to apologize right from the beginning. Apparently, I've got this bandwidth problem that I had last week as well, and I want to apologize to my friends on the panel, and I want to apologize for everybody out there if there are occasionally some interruptions here. The interruptions are always good for all of you to sort of contemplate and think about what it is that we're studying together. And I want to start by saying thank you to Yair, who gave us this wonderful, opened our souls and opened our study together this evening, reminded us of some of the things we talked about last week. And I would like to sort of begin by reminding us about something that I learned from some of our panelists last week in that structure of the 6 days that we studied last week that Yair referred to and showed us on that beautiful slide there. There are a couple of panelists who talked about the relationship between the first 3 days and the second 3 days. It's very clear that the second 3 days brings us down into this world of physical reality, into the world of vegetation, into the world of the sun and moon and the stars, the animal kingdom, human beings. And the first 3 days seem to be much more of a spiritual nature, of a higher level that's closer to the dimension of the divine. And what some of the panelists, if I remember, it was Ruth who talked about it, perhaps, and Yair, maybe some of the others, and you have to excuse me if I don't remember exactly, who talked about the fact that that means that in all of us too, part of the constitution of being a human being is having those two dimensions of being, 2 dimensions of reality. We're able to ascend, and in fact, part of our own being is that connected to those first 3 days of creation. The light of the first day of creation is in the world as well, and we're looking for it, and we look and try to understand it. Perhaps it's in the Bible as well. And certainly part of our own soul and spirit is connected to the higher dimensions of being that apparently were created in the first 3 days. And yet we're also created as a part and parcel of the last 3 days. We share, material, atoms, molecules. We share the physical dimension of the world as well. And we're constituted, we're built, God created us by giving us part of the first 3 days and part of the last 3 days. And I thought it was a very beautiful idea that some of the panelists raised last week to say that we too, we human beings, reflect those 2 dimensions of creation that we discovered in the first 3 days and the last 3 days. And I wanted to remind us as well of that teaching that we learned from some of the panelists last week. And so I want to welcome you all back as well, and remind us that the first few sessions will be concentrating on the first few chapters of Genesis, the first few chapters of the Bible, to try to understand the Bible's language of life, how God gave us sort of the DNA, the hard disk of creation. And then later on in this series, please God, we'll be talking about how that language of life gets applied to the mitzvot, to the commandments of God, to the great institutions that God created for us, the Shabbat, the sabbatical year, the holidays, relationships between human beings, the way in which we're asked to worship God, the way in which we deal with nature, questions of ecology, all of those interesting and practical aspects of the Torah, of the Bible, we'll be talking about later on in the series. But first, what we would like to try to do is understand the basic language of life, which God revealed to us in the first few chapters of Genesis of the Bible. And as Yair said, we occasionally will be analyzing the text, and occasionally we'll be using flights of imagination, and occasionally we'll just be letting our souls sort of open up and connect to the words of the Bible. And we'll be using all those different techniques and methodologies to try to understand how God is talking to us through the language of the Bible. And so I hope all of you have your Bibles open. What I'd like to do this evening, again, with the help of our wonderful and friendly panelists and their acute wisdom and sense of soul, I would call it, I would like to talk about a number of basic concepts in chapter 1 of the Bible. When I say basic concepts, I mean the building blocks of human civilization. I think that we can find in Genesis 1, and of course in the story of the Garden of Eden that we'll get to somewhere down the line, not a long way away, but certainly in Genesis chapter 1, there are a number of concepts that have really become the building blocks of human civilization. Certainly in Western civilization, certainly in the great religions of Western civilization. I'd like to talk about three basic ideas, three basic concepts that we find in Genesis 1 that I think we're all familiar with. I'd like to try together with you all out there. And I should mention that you're all invited to use the chat to ask questions and make comments as we go along, and we will stop in the middle of our discussion this evening to see what kind of interesting questions and ideas everybody out there has helped us see with the chat. But I'd like to talk about three basic concepts. I'd like to say right from the beginning what they are. One is the constant repetition in Genesis 1 that everything is good. And Yair began to talk about it. The second day of creation doesn't mention that God saw that everything was good. And Yair suggested a very interesting interpretation as to why God doesn't say that the second day of creation was good. Why it wasn't good? Did God create something that wasn't good? He couldn't say why. That's good. Well, we'll come back to that. So we'll talk about what it means that God said his creation is good. We'll talk about the very critical and very, very basic idea that human beings are created in the image of God. Perhaps one of the most important ideas that really constitute consciousness in Western civilization. What we understand humankind to be, created in the image of God. And in that connection, I'd like, if we have time, I don't know, we'll get to it, to talk about the idea of blessing that we began to talk about with the letter Bet that opens Breshit last week. Bet, Breshit, Bet, Baracha, blessing. And I'd like to talk about, perhaps if we can have time to get to it, to the notion of blessing that connects the last days of creation. But first, I would like to talk about a very simple word Tov, the word has 3 letters, Tov, good. We all know what the good is, theoretically. I want to say something that perhaps is so simple and so trivial that maybe doesn't have to be said. But one of our great philosophers, Jewish philosophers named Maimonides, Rambam, lived in Spain about 900 years ago, said a very interesting thing. He said, the most important thing that we can learn from the first sentence in Genesis in the Bible, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, is that the world has, behind the world, there is a will. Somebody wants the world to be just this way. Unlike, I think I mentioned this last week already, unlike some of contemporary science. Well, it all happened by a big bang. Some of the great mythologies of the early Middle East. Well, it just sort of, there was this giant egg, and it was sort of, something was hatched out of this giant egg. Or there was this great cataclysm at the beginning of creation. Or according to Aristotle, it was a series of cause and effects that sort of brought everything. Okay, so we talked about this last week. There's really no meaning. Ruth talked about this last week. There's no meaning. It's just a sort of a porridge. Well, when God willed creation into being, he said, this creation is good. He said, this creation is good. Not only did he say this creation is good, he said it over and over and over again, right? Let's take a look for a moment at our Bible. For instance, in verse 3, right from the beginning, and God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light that it was good. And then, of course, we have to skip day 2, as Yair pointed out. Day 3, and God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together in one place. Verse 9, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. I want to ask you a very simple question. You know, I once had a great privilege and a great, a great time working with artists. Spent a lot of time working with artists. And very often I would see, an artist would, a painter, a very serious painter, he would work for hours and hours and hours. And then he would take one step back and he would say, that's not it. That's not it. And then he would disappear like for about a week. Like a week later, he would show up and say again, hey, Dov, I'm going to try again. And then he'd work on it for a week and it would be, very different. And it would be much deeper. It would be much clearer. The composition would be better. The colors would be clearer. And then he would say, wow, I think I'm getting there, but this is not it yet. And then it would feel like he would come back and then finally would say, that's it. That's it. Okay, but God doesn't have to do that. Right? God doesn't have to do that. God is God. You can assume God created something. He didn't have to step back and say, let me take a look at that and see, wait a minute. That's just that's just what I wanted. I didn't make a mistake on that one. Is that, see, God always says, Vayar Elohim ki tov. And God took a look at the light. God took a look at the waters. God took a look at the vegetation. Vayar Elohim ki tov. And God looked at it, and it was good. What do you mean by that? That's such a simple but such a very deep question. I mean, is God like an artist that has to sort of rework his creation until he gets his process, till he gets it right, till he understands what it is that he really wants to do? And then he says, okay, this time I got it right. What does it mean? And it's over and over again, except of course in 2 places. On day 2, when God separated the waters from above from the waters from below, and we'll come back to that. And of course, very interestingly, when God created human beings, he didn't say, that's good. Only at the end of everything, of course, he said, Vayar Elohim et kol asher asa v'hinei tov meod. And God saw everything that he created, and he said, wow. You can even hear God say that. Wow, that's very good. That's not just good. Wow, this whole thing that I did, right? I created a new computer. I created, a new Android. Wow, this is this is very good. Well, what do you mean? He's God. What do you expect? Expect that it's not very good? Well, what does it mean that God says it's good, and then God at the end of everything says it's very good? I'm going to ask our astute and wise panelists to see if anybody wants to make a suggestion before I try to explain what some of the great Jewish commentators have said about it, and try to give it some deeper meaning as what perhaps I should say again, why does the Bible have to say it over and over again? Why isn't it just good enough to say it once? At the end of everything, God says, let's take a look at wow, it's so good, it's wonderful. Why does every single time God has to look at it and say, that's good, that's good, that's good. What's it all about? Anybody from our panelists want to make a suggestion? I'll give you a few seconds. I dropped this question on you. Everybody out there should know that this is not planned. I didn't send the questions to the panelists like beforehand so that they can think about it. This is like off the cuff, because that's the best way to ask a question. Because then somebody who responds has to respond right from, deep inside them. It's something that sort of comes up. What, anybody? Gabe, I see you unmuted yourself.
I'm unmuted. I think we've got two other people.
Okay, why don't you help me on that, Kim?
Okay. Kim, would you like to share?
No, not Gabe, you first. Have you admitted yourself first?
All right, I'm in. Okay, so my first instinct immediately when you asked the question, and I hope there are no wrong answers here. I see order in the sense that if you're building something from the bottom up and you're building in sequence, you might look at a foundation and say, that's good. And then you build something on top of that foundation that is like a refinement or a complex complication on the initial. And then you say, that's very good. And so what I would say between Tov and Tov Meod in this context is kind of like really good foundations, good structures, and then a higher level of sophistication and complexity that is achieving an even higher level. And it goes right with the art allegory that you were sharing, is that an artist feels the same way. I'm a musician, and I know that when I use fundamentals in music, it's good. But when I all of a sudden have this like, wow, that's really good, it's beyond fundamentals. It's another level of inspiration.
Okay, thanks, Gabe. Well, I'll try to respond later on when we get a couple of other suggestions from maybe Kim wanted to say something.
Sure, I'm right there with Gabe. It appears first, when anything's good in our lives, when we create anything, even a good food dish, it's like so good, it's like amazing, right? So, really, even with God, he had the vision of it and he's creating it, but he didn't know how amazing it was going to be until he actually did it. It's like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. But really, it also aligned with his purpose. And then I thought, we come into a couple chapters in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And he was really honing in on the good. And so that whole thing, that how good things are. So anyways, that's just a little.
Okay, I do want, I'm not going to respond fully to everything yet, but I do want to put a light on one of the points that Kim just made. I just want to shine a light on the fact that in the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, you do not find the word evil. Okay?
Oh, not at all.
Okay? I want to just put a light on that. The tree of good and evil appears in chapter 2, and we will get to that.
That's right.
It appears alongside the tree of life. Okay? But in Genesis chapter 1, the world is good. That's what Kim said. I will ask, well, actually, I'll talk about this question in a minute. What is the opposite of good in chapter 1? That's another wonderful question to think about. What is the opposite of good in chapter 1 if it's not evil? It's good and what? Or is there an opposite? I mean, just think about that out there for a minute, because maybe there's somebody else on the panel, one more comment, suggestion about our original question as to what's the importance of saying this over and over again. You know, this is good and this is good and the world is very good.
Ruth,
See Ruth. I
Uh,
can see Ruth.
I was just thinking, maybe God wasn't telling himself that it was good. Maybe he was telling us that it was good so that we could look at what he made and know that what he made was good because we had no experience of it before that.
Very
Okay,
good.
great. That's very good. How did you say that's very good? Okay. Francis, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. I think in God's nature, there's his hidden nature, the unrevealed nature, the nature of God that is not known to anyone. And then there is the nature that he reveals. And I believe that right from verse 3, when he says, "Let there be light," and on the basis of that, he began to create all that he created. The revealed nature of God, his nature is goodness. And so it is a kind of a confirmation of who he is in what he created as it is revealed. There is a lot more that is not yet revealed. So what has been revealed in what he has created is always good. That is him. That is his nature.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, let me try to sort of put together the different comments of our, all right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, the different comments of our panel and try to bring it all together with some of my own thoughts. First of all, I want to relate to what Gabe said right at the beginning. We have to appreciate the fact that any of you are familiar with mythology, Middle Eastern mythology, Roman and Greek mythology. There's a tremendous dimension of absurdity. That's the way things are because the gods wanted it that way. And there's no real rationale to it. It's sort of just, sometimes the gods are jealous, sometimes the gods are fighting each other. What Gabe says is very important. The fact that Genesis 1, chapter 1, creates order and creates a higher dimension of order means that science is possible, means that human beings have the possibility of making sense of the world. The world is not just a jumble of how should I say, of the wills of the different gods that really have no framework of rationality. There is order to this creation. And that's why you'll find, in my understanding, that Western civilization has a great love of understanding the world, of understanding nature, of science. I should say Jewish civilization has a great love for knowledge of nature, because the world is rational to a certain degree. As Francis said, there's a dimension that, and Gabriel talked about it last week, there's a dimension of the hidden. That's true. There's a dimension of the divine that's hidden. But there is a tremendous sense of order in chapter 1. There is what's above, what's on the land, and what's in the waters. And there are creatures that are above, and there are creatures on the land, and there are creatures in the waters. And now we can try to go and understand it. That's one very important point. That is the basis of a very important sense of consciousness for human beings that I believe chapter 1 is created for us. Number 2, as Kim says, it's God in a sense is saying to us, look at the world as a place that's good. There are many things, the world is, and we'll get to it when we get to chapter 2, there is good and evil in the world. But God says, the world that I created, Francis says God himself is good. And so the world that God created, the basic dimension, the hard disk of the world, is that the world itself is good. There will be evil in the world, and unfortunately, we're familiar with it. There will be evil people in the world. There will be when we get to the tree of good and evil, we'll talk a great deal about it. But in chapter 1, the world is good, and God is inviting us to look at the world as such. Okay, point number 2. But I'd like to come around to point number 3. Some of you hinted at, but in my own understanding, it's so important. Let me ask you this again. What's the opposite of good in chapter 1? It's not evil. There is no evil. And let me suggest.
Dark and chaos.
Yeah, thank you, Yair. The opposite of, Yair said it's the chaos that's written in verse 2. Before anything was good, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. In the Hebrew, it's not just without form and void, it's chaos. It's like gases. There is no form, there are no creatures. The opposite of Tov, says one of the great commentaries in the Bible in the Middle Ages, the opposite of Tov is non-existence.
Wow.
When God says, this is Tov, it sort of connects to something that Kim was getting at. When God says this is Tov, God says, just like I am good, I am telling you something fundamental about this creation. Creation is meaningful and ethical. It is not ethical because there are ethics in human, that we study, in philosophy, there is the philosophy of ethics. Life itself is good, and that is the fundamental sense of being. Bringing life into creation, and taking something out of non-existence and bringing it into existence is the fundamental meaning of value. Life itself has value. Okay, that is such an important idea in human civilization. It means that all human beings are called upon, first of all, to preserve life, because life itself has value, has intrinsic value. It's because God didn't just say it in general. God looked at this and said, this has value because I created it in the way that I wanted. And by saying that I created it in the way that I wanted, I say to you that this is life in its very essence. This is light in its very essence. Okay? This is water in its very essence. This is a tree. This is a pomegranate tree. This is a mango tree. This is a fig tree in its very essence. Just look at it. And the fact that it does figs in this way gives it value, because life itself has value. And the opposite of life is non-existence. The opposite of value is without form, in the void, chaos. And God brings life out of chaos, and that is good. That is such an important idea. That makes killing somebody a fundamental violation of the most important act that God did in creation. He created life. And he said, life is good. And anybody who takes life is violating the most basic sense of morality, which comes from the sense that life itself has value. Okay? I don't know if I said that too many times, but I think that's such an important idea. That makes, if I can say, another place where you can see this, that place makes medicine such an important human creativity, act of human creation. Okay, that makes the medical profession so important. That's why, if I can say so, I'm sorry if I say it this way. That's why so many Jews are doctors. I'm sorry that I put it that way. It's that simple language, because I want you to know that medical technology in Israel, okay, that biotechnology is one of the most advanced avenues of Israel's foreign policy, is biotechnology that's created in Israel. Unfortunately, we don't seem to be doing so well with the COVID here in Israel, but because medicine is saving lives. I want you to tell you a law, one of the halachot. Okay, I had one of my neighbors, unfortunately, called me on Friday 2 weeks ago and said that her father, she was going to visit her father for the Sabbath, and her father was on her deathbed. She wasn't sure that her father was going to survive the Shabbat. Okay, and she said to me, "What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to get ready to what looks like is going to happen?" I said to listen, Tamara, the law says that we do nothing that might move a person 1 second closer to death. We're not allowed to do anything. We believe in life. And you sit there with your father, who may not hear you, and you hold his hand and you sing to him. And who knows, even if he hears one note and that gives him 5 minutes more of life, that's the biggest mitzvah, that's the biggest fulfillment of life that you can possibly do. Because life itself is what God wants. That's why God said, this is Tov, and this is Tov, and this one, that's Tov. That's also Tov. And everything together is Tov Me'od. Okay? Why didn't God say Tov with regard to the second day of creation? Well, I just want to repeat what Yair already suggested to us, and I pretty much go along with what Yair said. In order to create life, God had to separate life from God. I want to say that sentence again. In order to create life, the first thing that God had to do was God had to separate life from God. It's sort of like a newborn baby, right? When this newborn baby was a fetus in the womb of their mother, it was Gan Eden, it was the Garden of Eden. Everything was 100%. Everything was taken care of. Didn't have to get up in the morning to make a living. Didn't have to go out and who knows what. Everything was right there. And all of a sudden, the baby is thrown out of this reality and separated from his or her mother in order to give the baby life, in order to give the baby individuality, in order to give the baby free will to create their own being. That's a gift. But at the beginning, the first thing that the baby does, what's the first thing the baby does? It begins to cry. And so God says, the first thing I need to do is, in a sense, give birth to the world, to separate the world from myself, to create this barrier between the the waters that give life above and the waters that give life below. I can't say that that's Tov, but without that, there wouldn't be anything in the world. I couldn't continue day 3. Day 3 couldn't happen unless I separated life from myself.
And the waters below even cried, according to the Medrash. So you have it there.
Right? According to the rabbis, the waters below begin to cry. And they say, but we want to return to the womb. We want to return to be connected to the divine and not live down here in this world. But God says that's the only way that there can be creation. And that's what I want. I want to give life value. Okay. It's an amazing thought. It's such a simple thing. God says, that's good, that's good, that's good. It's so simple. It goes over and over again. I don't know if we ever paid attention to it. And it's so important for human civilization, for everything that you said. It's order. Look at the world as something good, and make sure that you understand that life itself is the beginning of ethics, because life itself is the basis of value. Okay? Anybody want to make a comment before we go on to one more thought about Genesis 1 this evening? Anybody want to make a comment? Maybe we're going to take a look at some chat as well. But anybody on the panel may want to comment about all that.
Well, I do have a question.
Yes, Gabe.
This is more of a question than it is a comment, and it just betrays maybe some of my biblical Hebrew ignorance. But when we see the expression ki tov, I know that in modern Hebrew, ki is often used to say because, or to say like, there's a concept of consequence. Because of something, therefore this. And I was just wondering, is there any hint of that meaning in ki in this context? Because I have a corollary thought, if there was any connection.
Well, what is your corollary thought?
Well, my corollary thought is maybe to sort of, when I'm seeing these expressions of, it sounds like, it reads like God is observing what he created. And then, he's saying that it's good. And I'm just kind of inverting the thought a little bit and thinking that what if he, in a way, is seeing what he's created because it is good? And what I mean by that is, in the concept of creation, from a human experience, there's the ideation, and then there's the release of something that I want to create. And I'm just wondering if, in the sense that maybe the language here is a little bit floral, or maybe it can be played with in this way, that he's saying because he sees something good, because it is good, therefore I am creating it and I observe it.
Okay. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the idea, which is very important. It's clear that God, in the description of chapter 1, there is something that is willed by God, and then there is something that is created, and then there's something that is seen, and then God says something. There are a number of actions that God does, and we could talk about the relationship between them. What I do want to comment on is that one of the great medieval, perhaps the greatest medieval commentary on the Bible in Jewish history was a French commentator named Rashi, Shlomo Yitzhaki. And very often in the Bible, he comments on the fact that the word ki that you're pointing to has 4 different meanings. Okay? And one of them is because, but not always. There are sort of different kind of relational, different kind of relational attributions that are made by the word ki. It always creates some kind of a relationship. Okay, but it's not always a because. And that's why in the English it's translated that it was good. He said that it was good. And there are a number of different ways we could use the word ki, but I want to separate that from your idea, which is very important. That is that there are different ways in which we talk about God acting here. And it would be interesting to spend some time talking about God willing, God creating, God looking, and God saying. And they're all different kind of actions, but we're not going to talk about that today. And maybe that's, that's for next year when we come back.
Yeah,
Okay,
you're right.
yeah, here, Ken.
No, I'm wondering if this amazing thought that you just mentioned about that, that God has to actually, on the second day, he has to actually separate from him the water that is needed to create new life, is related also to the fact that on the sixth day, when man is created, like you pointed out, which was also not necessarily something that I paid too much attention to before, is that when he creates man, it doesn't say on man that he was good, but really he says on everything together that it is very good. It's almost like as if, in a similar way, man has to go through a process of separation, of differentiation, for every single human being to be able to realize the life potential within him, every single nation being able to realize the potential within them. There has to be a certain separation or differentiation, as we see in the reading from the Torah, the Shabbat, with each family is having its own language and having it developing on its own, as if this is crucial, but it ultimately brings everyone together. In other words, once every single person, every single nation is able to realize their individuality and their freedom of choice and to be able to bring out the special spirit that they have within them, then the culmination of all this is kind of like what we saw on the third day, with the waters coming together to create land. So here, all of the nations coming together, each one with their own unique characteristics, as one, becoming one, not as a unified one like we saw in the Tower of Babel, but rather as a very unique and differentiated oneness where you have diversity and everyone has realized themselves. And this is perhaps what we are also experiencing now in this study.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I just add to that? Just want to say that the earth doesn't become good to the third day, because he made the earth on the first day along with the heavens. And then, as you said, what is the opposite of good? Is it seems to be something that's void, empty, dark. That seems to be the opposite. So that's why I go back to your illustration, no pun intended, where you talked about the artist that you've been around, they didn't quite get it right away. I'm just wondering if that artist that will take the time to come back, look at it, and finally step back and go, now the earth is good, because he makes the heaven, he makes the earth, but it's not good yet, or at least it doesn't seem to be. It's without form. It's dark. Anyway, that's just I'm dwelling with your original thought and trying to connect that with your years.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Thank you very much. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I just saw James mention that there is a question here on the question and answer chat session. Maybe you could take a look at what that question is, Gabe.
Would you like me to read it to you?
Yeah, if you could, thank you.
Okay, so this question is from Naomi. Thank you for sharing your question, Naomi. Maybe this is completely off topic, but would you address the termination or the abortion of unborn life in the womb in the context of life being told, and as this being related to the moral fabric of our society? Does this explain moral decay? The disregarding of life at the beginning.
Wow. What what can I say about a question like that? We're going to talk much more about those kind of questions when we get to the story of the Garden of Eden. But let me just say that there are a number of very, very central figures, especially in the tradition of Kabbalah. I don't like to use the word mystics, but in the most inner interpretation of the Bible, that suggests that, and perhaps this goes along with what Dean just said, that suggests that that God, in creation, there isn't a complete end to what we learned, what we said at the beginning. The beginning was, right, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. Well, God created many, many things to bring creation into existence. But it's possible that he didn't quite finish the act of creation. And that we live in a reality in which there's a tremendous amount, most of what is life, and life is value. But, between the atoms there, between the electrons and the protons, there is a dimension of chaos. I'm trying to remember, there's like in physics today, there's this analysis of the dimension of, the butterfly effect. That creates a hurricane because somewhere out there in the Pacific Ocean, there was a butterfly that just went like that. There's a dimension of disorder. Where did the COVID come from? Did God allow the COVID to happen? Well, how did that happen? As you asked, Naomi, what about the fetus that didn't completely develop? I would like at this point, if you would allow me, because there's not a lot of time left, to connect it to, even though there's much more to say about that, I would like to connect it to what Yair mentioned, and that is that human beings were also not described as being good. And I would like to connect that to what looks like the opposite kind of notion, and that is that clearly another very basic concept, and Naomi, I'm going to continue relating to your question here. Another very basic concept in Western civilization, clearly many, many societies have done a great deal with this, is that Adam was created in the image of God. That clearly is, how should I say, a formative concept that differentiates the tradition, all of the cultures that came out of the Bible, distinguishes them from many other cultures. It says something about human beings. It gives special value to human beings. Besides saying that everything is good, before I can say that everything is very good, I say, well, wait a minute, there is a creature here that has a dimension of being that is higher than all other beings. And that's a very, very important statement to make. What I would like to say, there are many, many interpretations in Jewish tradition. What is the aspect of human nature that is being described when the Bible says Adam is created in the image of God? What part of our being is the divine aspect that is within us? Is it our rational faculties, which some of the great Jewish philosophers claimed that was true? Others said it was our soul, that our soul is really a divine spark. There is a divine essence in each of us. And as Yair just said, the divine essence in each of us creates each of us in a different way. Each of us has a different face, as the Talmud says. Each of us has a different personality. Each of us came from Adam, one human being. And each of us has a different character, a different personality, a different face. We all have different faces, except for some of us that are, identical twins. But most of us, all have, we look different. We look different inside, we look different outside, even though it's the same divine spark. So some of the great commentaries say, well, it's the soul. Some say that there's a lower soul and a higher soul. What I'd like to suggest, if you go along with me for a minute, is that in chapter 1 of the Bible, when the Bible says that human beings were created in the image of God, the Bible wants to tell us, you need to look at what I've said to you about God. In order to understand what it means that human beings were created in the image of God, we have to see what was said in chapter 1 of the Bible about God. Well, not a lot of things have been said yet about God. Many things will still be said about God later on. God will have many attributes. But in the chapter 1 of the Bible, what is God? What has been said about God in chapter 1 of the Bible?
Creates
What?
order out of chaos.
He creates order out of chaos. He creates life out of nothing. He is a creator of life, and he gives life value. That's what we've learned. Well, that means, my dear friends, that when the Bible says human beings were created in the image of God, the Bible wants to teach us first that each of us are small gods. Each of us have within us the ability to create, and the ability to create life, and the ability to create life and give life value. That's what it means to be created in the image of God. We are all, Kim, 1 minute, I see you want to say something. Let me just finish.
Oh, no. I'm
Sorry.
just agreeing with you.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's the first thing. There are many other things that the Bible will say about God and human beings. We pray, we have souls. There are many things that the Bible will say. But the first thing the Bible wants to say is very dangerous. And this is why I want to connect it to some of the things that you've said. God is taking a risk by creating a creature that has the ability to create, not to create on the dimensions of God. Absolutely not. But yes, to create. And as human history has has progressed, and especially in the last 100 years, we all have become aware of the fact that human beings in the last 100 years have become a little bit too enamored with their ability, to engineer the DNA, to split the atom. We become a little too enamored with being the creator down here on planet Earth. And that's why God didn't say, with regard to human beings are good. Because God is waiting for human beings to become what he wants. God is waiting for us. God is waiting for us to use our amazing abilities to create life as individuals, as societies, as human civilization. God is waiting for us so that one day he'll be able to say, that creature, that's Tov. God is waiting for us. That's what Dean says by the fact that the earth is still chaotic. The world is still chaotic. The world is waiting for human beings to fulfill what God's mission is for a human being. God took a risk by creating a creature that could create life, that could be a little bit like God, that could split the atom, you can split the atom and light up a city somewhere in Africa that doesn't have electricity. And unfortunately, you can split the atom and do the opposite. And it all depends on whether God can say about human beings, that's Tov. That's what I want. That's life as value. And it's sort of an open question that God, by creating human beings in the image of God, God has created a world in which the world has not yet been completed, and God has created a creature to complete the world. I think that Francis or somebody said, maybe Edward said that last week. God has created a world and is waiting for human beings to complete it. That's the amazing story here. And so God can say, it's all tov me'od, but I'm waiting so that I can say about this human being, zeh tov.
Did
But
we,
maybe the Tov Ma'od is such an enormous statement because it's almost like God is saying that this situation now already, the fact that there is mankind with God's image capable now of completing creation, regardless of what happens, regardless of the choices that man makes, it's already Tov Me'od, perhaps suggests that this is the primary purpose, was to create a man with a will who can complete creation, and that in itself is the purpose. And was the world is almost created for us to have this opportunity to be partners with God. Of course, it depends what we do with it, but the Tov Me'od that appears from the very beginning suggests that just creating a framework that provides mankind with life and with an ability to be a partner with God and to express God's personality, whatever, with each one with this unique face in the world and to express it in the world, that in itself is Tov Me'od.
Thank you, Yair. Anybody else want to say anything at this point?
we have a couple good questions.
Okay, Gabe.
Did you want to respond to Yair before we got to the questions?
No, let's hear the questions, then I'll try to respond to it all together.
Okay, so we have two of them. The first is from Dorothy. Would it be true to think that the chaos mentioned at the beginning was caused by Satan when he was thrown out of heaven?
Let me hear the second question as well.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
Thank you, Dorothy. I'll come back to it in a minute.
and the second question is, how do you explain from Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, God created man in brackets 1 in his own image, male and female he created them, 2 in quotes.
Who asked that question?
That was Paul Mukasey.
Paul. Okay, Paul, first let me start with the easy question, because Paul, why is that an easy question? Because that question we are going to deal with, up front when we talk about the Garden of Eden. We're going to talk about that up front. How does the Bible talk about man and woman? And the interesting question is exactly the question that you asked, is it 1 or 2? And that's how it's connected to the story of the Garden of Eden, where it looks a little bit different. There's Adam, and then there's woman taken from Adam. We'll talk about man and woman. If you have patience, you come back here in about 2 weeks. We'll get to it. I promise. Sorry? Yeah. No, we're not going to get to it next week. We're going to get to it in 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to talk about Shabbat. 2 weeks, we're going to talk about the Garden of Eden. So we'll come back to that, Paul. Let me talk about what Dorothy asked and talk about what Yair said. Look, that's a very, very deep question. And I'm sort of getting into deep waters here, because the concept of Satan, okay, there's a different reading on that in Judaism and Christianity. And I really don't want to, as I say, I really don't want to say something that might sound like I'm talking to my Christian friends in a way that's not in tremendous amount of honor and respect. And so I just want to say, yes, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, James, we're going to talk about that. I just want to say that is there another power in the world that somehow is independent of God? That's the question. Is there a power in the world that is independent of God? An autonomous power that is independent of God? That's a question. Again, I don't really want to get in our reading. There isn't such a thing. Let me say quickly, such a deep question. In Isaiah, there's a sentence that says, God created light and darkness. He created peace and he created evil. It says that in Isaiah. And that sort of that goes back to something that we've been talking about here in the last few minutes. God created a world that's not complete. And he's waiting for, he still directs the world. He holds on to the world. He holds the world in his hands, as we say. But he's allowing, okay, Yair said, Tov Meod. There's a very, very, very deep and great comment by one of the great rabbis in the Talmud named Meir, who said this amazing thing. He said, when God said everything is very good, Tov Meod, you know what Tov Meod is? That's the evil inclination in human beings. And even the evil inclination in human beings, when God looks at everything, he says that's very good. Why? Because if God didn't give us what is called an evil inclination, we wouldn't have free will. And there wouldn't be such a thing as human beings. And God wants human beings to have free will. But if he wants human beings to have free will, he has to give us the possibility of doing evil. Right? One of the great contemporary, nearly contemporary Jewish philosophers, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, said that it is the patience of human beings with God who allowed human beings to be evil sometimes, which allows God to continue with the world. If we would say to God, we don't want this anymore. Evil is too difficult for us. We don't know what would happen, but we say to God, we want to continue this because we deeply believe in human beings. We deeply believe in free will. We deeply believe in you holding on to the world so that the world is good. And so that even though there is chaos, and even though there is the evil within human beings, evil inclination, okay, and even though there are fetuses who don't fully develop, okay, there is modern contemporary medicine, right, that is moving forward in helping fetuses grow to their full term. And what 150 years ago would always end in a miscarriage doesn't always end in a miscarriage anymore. And that's part of human beings being in the image of God. And another part of the being in the image of God, as it was Edward, I think, who talked about the riches of Africa being taken by Western countries, raw materials, and leaving the countries of Africa poor, okay? That's also part of what God is waiting for human beings to become. To divvy up the riches of the world in a way that allows every human being to have what they need. And God is given, we'll talk about this, God is given almost an infinite amount of food. And all we need to do is give it out in a good way. And so the chaos remains, and the world is tov meod, and yet the world needs to be completed. And that's why God created this world. Because in a sense, okay, well, I need to stop because I've been going on here for about an hour. I just want to end by completing the session by saying, I guess what we're going to begin with, the third basic idea that I mentioned we would talk about, I invite you to think about it during the week before we come back next week. God blesses the world in day 5, day 6, and day 7. What's interesting is if we are created in the image of God, we are also able to bless the world. Many of you, I'm sure, know that in Genesis, Abraham blesses, Isaac blesses, Jacob blesses, Moses blesses. We all have the power to bless, to change reality by using words, by using speech. God created the world by speech. He blessed. We are created in the image of God. We will try to understand what blessing means. What does it mean that God blessed the seventh day? It's another interesting question. And we will ask, how do we use the faculty of blessing? And I will ask, here I'm giving this away already. I will ask our panelists next week, well, how do we use our faculty to bless? Which apparently God has given human beings. And with that, I will complete what I have to say. The session I've gone on for about an hour. Right, Gabe? Is that it?
Yep.
And so I think I'll bring it to an end. If there are any other questions, maybe, or comments, or the panelists want to say something, I'll end what I have to say right here. Thank you very much for everybody, for the panelists and everybody out there. This is such a wonderful place to meet and study the Bible. And let me say that.
Hey, my pleasure. I wanted to just get maybe just two comments that were made. One
Sure.
comment made by Mikhail, and he said, God is still waiting for us to choose good, to choose to, and in quotes, he quotes Isaiah 2:4, beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. That was a comment. And then I believe you answered this one, the comment by James Magara about the gap theory between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2.
Well, I answered that by saying we're going to talk about that in 2 weeks. But we're definitely going to talk about it. Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Regarding the question of transforming our weapons into plowshares, there's a very interesting comment made by the Talmud, which says, by the Medrash, that says that there's no better vessel for blessing than peace. That the only way that we can realize fully the blessing that God has created in this world is if we achieve peace. And I think that it begins with us accepting that and realizing it to a degree that we say we've had enough of hatred, we've had enough of destruction. We want blessing, and we want everyone to have blessing. And the only way to achieve that is if we do away with all of those other things that detract the peace and the harmony that can exist in this world. And again, this is why I'm so excited about what we're doing here, because I think that we can demonstrate by this study together how beautiful, how harmonious, and how peaceful the study of Torah can be. And hopefully we will also learn how to bring this same peace into our lives in every aspect of our lives.
And I just want to say too, Rev Dov, is that please don't ever feel that where you know that there are some stark differences between Christian theology and your own theology. Please, one of the reasons why I love Christians and Jews coming together to study is so that we can learn about some of those differences and to be able to gain greater understanding, and perhaps we'll go from good to that's really good.
Okay, Dean, next week you will explain to us what's the relationship between really good and very good. But I like what you just said.
Kim, please.
Rabbi, I just want to tell you how pertinent next week is. I just received this question from one of my Hebrew students. She's a Christian. And she says, just curious about the word barak. It seems to mean blessing with cursing as an opposite meaning. Is the cursing a sarcastic meaning? This word has always bothered me. So,
Okay, thanks, Kim. We'll get to that next week.
okay.
If everybody can wait that long. Why not get there?
I wanted to just add one little penny to the, eating swords into plowshares. It's interesting that the prophet Joel actually has the inverse formulation, that sometimes people have to beat their plowshares into swords. Unfortunately, it may never be, but there seems to be a beautiful balance in the Bible that is very practical, and I see the tensions in the human experience are well represented, across all the different texts involved. So
Very true.
Thanks, Gabe.
So with that, we have exactly 11 minutes until the formal end of our scheduled session today. Did anyone else on the panel want to share some thoughts about the material today? We have time.
Okay, well, let's see. I was thinking earlier, so I guess I'm just going to play back on a thought when we were talking about the birthing aspect of creation. I never cease to be able to get away from the fact that the earth itself, or the dry land, was actually, it was just so encompassed in water, just like a baby in a womb. And so when those waters were abated, this naked earth appears. It has nothing on it, just like a baby. And the first thing Hashem does is he begins to dress it. He begins to cover it so it's no longer naked, and so it's no longer to the elements that he's going to create, the sun and the moon, that it's going to be protected from even these elements, just like a mother would protect her child from the elements of the world. And so I was thinking of that, Rabbi, when you were talking about the birth, how much this concept of birth, when you were asked the question about the abortion question, actually, and how much birth and life is really in everything that Hashem is doing in the process, as well as the creation. So that was a thought that I had earlier.
Another thought I had, and perhaps you're going to say something along the lines that you're going to have to wait 2 weeks for this, Dean, but at risk of hearing that, is it possible that man being made in God's image, that something got lost between chapter 1 and ultimately the abandonment from the garden? Is there been something lost in that image, or something that needs to be rediscovered?
Well, let me just respond very quickly, because I've done this to you, Dean, too many times. I don't want to do it again. Let me just say that we all know that, and this is connected to the question about the gap theory between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. But we all know that in Genesis 1, Adam is created in the image of God. He's sort of created as the crown of creation. We all know that in Genesis 2, Adam is created out of the dust of the earth. And then there's divine breath that's blown into him, that's breathed into him. And that seems to be two different stories, okay? And what I want to say is that one of the interesting aspects of the Bible, there's a very important contemporary scholar of the Bible here in Israel who's really developed this very, very beautifully. There are a number of places in the Bible. It's sort of a methodology of the Bible to tell a story in two different ways. Sometimes there are, let me put it with this. We're going to talk about the Sabbath. Okay, there are 14 different times the Bible talks about the Sabbath. And each time the Bible talks about the Sabbath, it's like a different aspect. And I always think it's like a diamond. Like there are many different facets. That's because life has different sides to it. And God is showing you that when you can look at life in a different way, each time in a different way, and in each time you look at it, there's a divine light that shines through there. Okay? And so there is truth to the fact that we are created in the image of God. And there is truth to the fact that we are created out of the dust of the earth, and then God blows breath into us. And if we look at ourselves, we can see that it's all true. And each time God is talking about some kind of basic dimension of creation from a different angle. And we have to put those angles together to create a picture. But God wants to give it to us in a different angle because each angle is so important by itself. And if he just said, okay, it's all one porridge, right? Again, we get lost. But now we can say, okay, there's chapter 1, and chapter 1 is so important because it teaches us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And chapter 2 teaches us 6, 7, and 8. And now let's see if we can put that together. Okay? So, yes, Adam has different sides to him.
So
And
fascinating. It's also, you see this in the Sinai, the giving of the Torah with the 10 Commandments. Again, the story is told twice, right? And there are differences between the stories. So here you see that it really does happen many times in the Bible, that we have these multiple versions, and they're bought as, it's not like a different book. It's the same book that comes and tells us these two versions exactly for that.
there's a very, we need to finish it, but yes, Dan? There's
Well,
a very,
I'm just going to say what I'm hearing is not only good and very good, it's really good. Thank you.
the Talmud says, these and those are the word of the living God. And then you say, wait a minute, these two rabbis are arguing with each other. They're saying the opposite of one to the other. How can it be these and those are the words of the living God? Well, that's because, okay, this is a great way to stop. Everybody out there is still with us. You can see how the different panelists and even Rabbi Dov have different ways of talking about the Bible. And that means that God's light, okay, is shining down into the world through the different prisms of the different souls of human beings. And it's not like, well, somebody said this and somebody says that, and this is true, and that's not true. If we're all listening carefully, right, what Gabe says, what Dean says, what Kim says, what Ruth says, Jair says, Edward says, right? Wow, everybody says something so interesting, so important. Well, that's true not only about the different souls, it's true about reality as well. Reality has different faces. And the Bible teaches us how to look at the world and see God's light coming through the different faces of reality. So human beings are created in the image of God, but human beings are also dust out of the earth. That's also true. Okay. Well, how does okay, that's true. Well, don't get worried about it. Don't lose your sleep about it. Just, say that's the way God is teaching us how to look at us and how to look at the world by showing us different pictures. Okay. Okay.
I wanted to maybe just respond to something you had said earlier, and it was partially in response to the question about some of the theological distinction between how Christians and how the Jewish community views Satan and the concept of Satan within Scripture.
Right.
Something you said about God creating good and evil, or creating the two sides of some of these, how can we say, like positive, pleasant experiences, but then there's also the painful, negative experiences that we experience in life. And I think that's a very, very interesting observation, just because anyone who's been on the earth for any amount of time starts to realize that, whoa, my experience of life is not all pleasant. It's not all good. It's not all, puppies and ice cream. And that can be very confusing for I think I'm from a Christian heritage. That can be very, very confusing for Christian people who try to reconcile a good God with good ideas, with good creation, Tov, in Genesis, and then experiencing so much pain and sorrow and sometimes evil at the hands of people, or anyway, I'm just saying that I appreciate how you kind of like started wading into that. I think it's a very interesting topic, and I think it's very relevant. So thank you.
That has given all believing people problems. That's given Jews problems and Christians problems. And I hope it's given Muslims problems, that there is, as you say, it's not all puppies and ice cream, as you said.
Yeah. So we have 1 minute left on my clock. Does anyone have any closing thoughts before we wrap up? You got another 30 seconds maybe. I think if no one jumps up now, I think we're going to wrap up for today. And first of all, Rapto, thank you so much for sharing. And panelists, thank you. You guys have been amazing. This has been really good. And I'm looking forward to next week. We're going to be sending out the emails, the notifications. We're getting that process down. It hasn't been perfect, and we apologize if there was any confusion this week for any of you. We're going to try to do a better job this week, making it clear, structured, so that everyone can come in and enjoy what we're doing today.
So, Gabrielle, I think November, is it 1st or 2nd? We jump here in Israel back. We go back somewhere, back in time.
Yeah. So we'll communicate with you, and we're gonna send out very clear information about what the timing is and who is. Yeah, and exactly, Israel's gonna be jumping back. You start at 8 o'clock today because there's a spread. Our clocks don't change at the same time, so that's why there was confusion this week.
I think the next Sunday's the 31st, so I think we're still going to be on this time. It'll be the next week after that we'll be back in sync.
There's a little chart on the original ad on the poster that Edward made that has all the times listed as they will be for the whole series. So maybe we could recirculate that, whoever sending out emails.
Great. All right. Well, Shavua Tov, everybody. Have a good week. And
Good Tov. Thank you.
Thanks again. Wonderfully.
bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, Shavua Tov.
Kol Tov, only good.
Only good. And you all told me. Bye-bye.